This week in Quadriga. Egypt. Will the elections be mired by violence? Familiar and troubling. Images from Cairo's Tahrir Square. Once again, thousands of protesters call for the government to step down, and security forces clash with them once again. The demonstrators accused the generals who took power after Mubarak's resignation of hijacking the revolution. The military rulers say elections will proceed on schedule despite the unrest, but many Egyptians have lost faith in the junta. Your host, Melinda Crane.
Hello and welcome to Quadriga, the international talk show on DW TV. Is Cairo's revolution unfinished and about to enter another stage? That's what we want to talk about today with three journalists and scholars who've been following events closely.
Joining Melinda Crane today, Ebtisam Ali Hussein works with the Friedrich Naumann Foundation in Cairo. The Egyptian political scientist is writing her dissertation on Muslim cultures and societies and also reports for Arab media. Thomas Hasel teaches at Berlin's Free University, focusing on authoritarian regimes in Northern Africa and democratization. He also reports from the Middle East as a freelance journalist. Ahmed Badawi is a research fellow at Berlin's Middle East Studies Center, the Zentrum Moderner Orient. A political scientist originally from Egypt, he has worked extensively in development studies, including for the Oxford Research Group and the International Crisis Group.
Ahmed Badawi, there was an uneasy kind of a peace toward the end of the week. What do you think? Will it hold?
It's difficult to say. If they manage to maintain the buffer between some of the demonstrators and the Ministry of Interior, then most likely it will hold. Because so far there has not been violence in Tahrir Square proper. The violence has been in the streets that are leading to the Ministry of Interior. And the latest agreement stipulates that there will be barbed wire, and now there is a buffer zone made up of the physicians, the doctors who have been treating the wounded in Tahrir Square, in order to prevent some, not all, some of the demonstrators to try to approach the Ministry of Interior. If this holds, then probably there will be less violence from now on, hopefully.
Ebtisam Hussein, what are you hearing from people in Egypt, from friends and family? Are they concerned that the revolution could break out again and there could be widespread violence?
Yeah, like last Friday, people could sense something was going serious, was going to happen. And actually, this is what actualized Saturday, Sunday, and so on. It was like the streets were blocked and people were afraid to go on the streets in order to go to jobs or something. Like they were really afraid and still afraid up till this moment.
What do people expect at this point from the military? We saw two speeches from Field Marshal Tantawi, one quite tough, and the other one, he did make some concessions. He made an apology for the violence that had occurred earlier in the week. Does that indicate that he might go further and make additional concessions?
I don't think he will make any additional concessions at this moment. I think also that the apology was very important because actually this is what people on the streets reiterated, the people who were wounded and injured and so on. They said, we would like to have an apology for the people who died, for the people who were injured, and that was the most important thing. I don't think he would go for more concessions, not right now. He already said that he will hand over power in July. So
that, of course, is not enough for many of the protesters. Thomas Hasel, are the protesters right that the military council has done far too little to bring democratization to Egypt?
I think they are right, yeah. The military council had the chance for the last 8 to 10 months to show that it really supports a democracy. But it showed that it didn't, and that human rights are not of its greatest concern. And there were so many bloggers, so many people arrested, put to military trials, etc., etc. There were so horrible stories about torturing people. There were all these declarations in the last weeks of the military saying, no matter what you vote for in the next elections, we will be out of parliamentary democratic control anyway as a military, yeah? And declaring that is really a problem. There was even somebody saying, well, if there is a council of 100 people who will vote for the constitution, only 20% of them will be from the parliament. And this is something that really infuriates people, because they have the feeling the military doesn't want to give any power to the people, and this is a problem for the future.
Ahmed Badawi, we just mentioned Tantawi says elections will go ahead on schedule, parliamentary elections this week, presidential elections then in the spring. What does that mean under the circumstances? What can we expect in the way of democratization, if any?
Well, democratization is a long-term aim. Egypt is not going to be like Germany or Norway in 6 months or even 6 years, so we have to be very clear on that. Those who are saying that democratization in Egypt could have happened in the last 6 months, I think they're not being realistic at all. You're talking about a country that has been accumulating layer upon layer of authoritarian structure, bureaucratic, cultural, mental, otherwise. This cannot be dismantled in 6 months. So we have to be very clear on this.
But the military, of course, was very much part of that structure. Can we really expect the military to dismantle its own power?
Absolutely not. We should not expect that. And thinking that this could have happened peacefully was also an unrealistic expectation on part of everybody. The military now is not part of the story of democratization. The military now is part of the story of stability. And this is something that a lot of people in Egypt long for. The military has done what any military could do, giving orders and trying to create some kind of a roadmap for a peaceful transition of power through election. I don't think that the military could have been we shouldn't have expected anything more than that from the military. The military was not responsible and could not be seen as responsible for bringing democracy to Egypt. This is the responsibility of the politicians who should come to power through election. And the military said there will be election, and elections are supposed to be held. Ironically enough, the people who are in Tahrir now are the ones who think that elections should not be held on Monday. So we have to really think very carefully about this.
Ebtisam Ali Hussein, one of the things they're shouting for on Tahrir Square is for the resignation of Field Marshal Tantawi. But is there any alternative within the military council?
Well, other names had also been defined, like Roueni and Anan, and El-Fangari. They were all cited for negative quotes made in the media, and this is why I wouldn't say that it's about only Tantawi, but the things that Tantawi was part of the Mubarak regime for 20 years at least. And this is why people were like, if it's like Tantawi, we don't know if he's really loyal to the revolution. But other names are equally dismerited.
Let's take a look at what it is the protesters are calling for and what they don't like about Field Marshal Tantawi.
Field Marshal Mohammed Tantawi heads the military council that took over after Mubarak's downfall. For many, he's tantamount to a reincarnation of the dictator. Egyptians fear that the junta does not intend to hand over power to a civilian government. In a television address on Tuesday, Tantawi promised to speed up reform, but said the military would determine both timetable and electoral procedure for a transition. One victim of what many Egyptians see as a new autocracy is Dr. Ayman Noor of the Liberal Party El Khrad. He has been forbidden to campaign, and now he doubts the revolution can achieve its goals.
Thomas Hazel, let's take a look at what this means for some of the parties, including Ayman Noor and the Liberal Party, but perhaps starting with the Muslim Brotherhood, because it, of course, stood and stands most to gain from a rapid election timetable, doesn't it?
Well, at the moment it looks like if the elections take place, the Muslim Brotherhood will win a huge share of the seats in the parliament. How much, we don't know. There are speculations about 30%, some say 35, 40, but we don't know. And there's even a split in the Islamist camp, if you can call it like this. There are now different angles and different groups that created parties or that stay out of the process in general. So we don't know really how big will the share be at the moment.
Apparently, Ahmed Badawi, some of the younger members of the Muslim Brotherhood are now gravitating towards supporting the protesters. What could that mean for the Brotherhood and for its political strength?
From the start, from January, there has been a considerable number of young Muslim Brotherhood members who have been part of the revolution's coalition. And they are still part of this coalition until now. And some of them are forming a political party which is something that is not accepted by the leadership of the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood, by and large, has been far away from Tahrir over the last few days because, as you rightly said, for them, their best interest is for election to be held on time. The young people of the Muslim Brotherhood, they are torn between their identity as loyal supporters of the Muslim Brotherhood on the one hand, and between their radical revolutionary spirit, which is making them part of the Tahrir coalition, which is camping in Tahrir until now.
Ibtisam Hussein, apparently there's talk of the Muslim Brotherhood walking away from its de facto deal with the military council.
Actually, the most important point in the relation was the intention of the military to augment its power in the upcoming regime. Like, they wanted to be out of accountability for their budget, and they wanted to have a bigger role. And this is why actually the Muslim Brotherhood were worried, because if they will have the majority in the parliament, then what does it mean that the military this big role has? And this is why they were like, no, when it comes to prerogatives and authorities, then there will be the competition of power, the normal, traditional, usual competition of power between political rivals.
In other words, if the military were to discredit itself in the next 6 months after these elections, that would redound upon the Muslim Brotherhood in a negative way. Is that what you're telling us?
I'm just telling that the intentions of the military to augment its role in the regime, regardless of setting back in July or not, will, of course, hinder the power of the majority party in the parliament.
Thomas Hazel, the fact that the Muslim Brotherhood and the military council have been bedfellows, even if uneasy bedfellows now at this point, doesn't this indicate in a way that we're still seeing the power structures of the old regime carried over into this new epoch? In a way, isn't the revolution that began in the winter unfinished?
It's totally unfinished, and I would even say it's maybe starting now. To get rid of a president that has 81 years and who was anyway disputed even in the military. I mean, Mubarak wanted to have his son as a successor, and there was a big dispute in the military about that. So in a way you could say, well, they got what they wanted to. But now, of course, the main work begins to really revolutionize or change a system, an autocrat system that's so old, that's so much in every social strata, it's everywhere. And you have to change the mentality of people that don't know, for example, the rule of law. People in Egypt and mostly the whole Arab world don't know what rule of law means. They know what it means, but they never experienced it. Yeah? And this is something to trust the law, to trust state institutions that they do everything in an equal, fair way. It's something that has to be built up from the beginning, from little kids. They have to start having another view on their state.
So if the revolution is truly entering another phase or beginning, as Thomas Hazel said, what are the steps that need to be taken now? Ahmed Baldawi, you hinted before that you think elections should go ahead.
Yes. Well, there are two views. The view of the radical element of the revolution is that election is too early. We want a permanent revolution until the regime itself collapses. We want to rebuild the country from the bottom up. We want to change the consciousness of the people, and they see election as an impediment to this, because election would bring to power, exactly as you said, some of the old, will entrench some of the old structures, especially if it results in some kind of alliance between the Muslim Brotherhood and the army. On the other hand, with the kind of status quo that exists now, with the balance of power that exists in the country between what you might broadly describe as the reactionary, the pragmatic, and the radical elements, the only way to resolve this deadlock is by going to the people through election. Otherwise, it will never be resolved. People cannot vote with their feet, and they cannot expect to go to Tahrir, a few thousand, and every time they go to Tahrir, they want a new government. The only way to resolve this problem is through election.
Ebtisam Ali Hussein, do you agree? Do you think elections need to go forward next week as planned, despite the deficiencies in the structures within the party system and so on?
I think when it comes to violence, the elections will do no good. Like, actually, people now, the protesters, they are wondering whether the military will abstain from forging the elections. And this is the most important point. This is the key point in adhering to the results of the elections. If the elections are believed to be forged, then people will not, they will not be in rest. They will always continue to go to the streets and demonstrate, and then there will be violence and violence again. So this is the point.
I guess we have to be very careful against self-fulfilling prophecies. If people expect that the elections will be forged, then most probably the whole society will be even further radicalized. We have to judge things when they happen, not before they happen. What we're seeing in Egypt now is an incredible amount of paranoia in the street, between the different political forces. The demonstrators in Tahrir, they're not just fighting against the army. We have to keep in mind that they're also fighting against other established political forces. The politicians want the elections to go ahead. So this mood of fear and paranoia is making things much more complicated. So far, we have no clear evidence that there's going to be forgery in the elections. We don't know that. But it's our experience, our fear from how things used to happen before that are making people so anxious. But we have to fight against this in ourselves. And if we really want to build a new Egypt, then people have to just go ahead, do what needs to be done, and judge events after they happen. And this is one of the key strategic mistakes, I believe, that the demonstrators in Tahrir are doing now. They are wasting their energy prematurely. The big test will come when there is an elected government, and we have to see how the army and the elected government are going to share power. It is then that people need to be in the street, ready to make sure that the army will really relinquish power to an elected government. What is happening now is 3 days premature. People can be a little bit more patient, just for 3 or 4 more days. And this is, I think, is a big strategy. They are tactically very successful, but strategically, I think they're making a big mistake.
Thomas Hazel, in the process that Ahmed Badawi described of transition, democratization, civil society, of course, plays a crucial role, and so do political parties. There was much talk after the events of last winter that the West needed to be in there helping to build civil society, to build the kind of organs that would give people the sense that they have a voice. Has that been happening?
I'd say reluctantly. I mean, there were a lot of projects, also from Germany, little democratization projects and showing young people how to vote and what the whole idea about democracy is and stuff like that. But I think there's always this discussion of Western interference. And many Egyptians are saying, don't interfere too much or not at all. The problem is the West interferes all the time, of course. Yeah, I mean, by giving 1.3 or something billion from the US to the Egyptian state and to the military, by giving weapons, selling weapons to Egypt. And we shouldn't forget, Egypt is strategically for the US and for Europe a very, very important player. It's near to Israel. It has a peace treaty to Israel. And Israel is still, of course, a very important topic. And Netanyahu, some days ago, was saying in the Knesset, we preferred the Mubarak regime because we knew who was our partner. Now we don't know. I was recently in a talk with an Israeli, and she was saying, well, when there's the military, we know whom to call. With the other people who are coming now, we don't know whom to call. So they prefer somehow the stability over democratization, which can lead to other things as well, of course.
Before we discuss further what the West could or should be doing, let's take a brief look at who the protesters are and what it is that motivates them, because they, of course, many of them are young and they have suffered greatly from the economic crisis that has hit Egypt.
Egypt's economy is performing at its weakest level in 20 years. Foreign investors are pulling out. Joblessness is rampant, especially among young people. Most foods are now being imported, raising prices by 20%. Bread is affordable, but only because it's subsidised by the government. This man supports a wife and 4 children on less than €4 a day. Recovery will be difficult without a rebound in the tourism sector. 40% fewer travellers are visiting the pyramids or the Red Sea resorts. During the recent violence against Coptic Christians, booking fell by twice that amount.
Ibtisam Hussein, the state of the economy would seem to indicate that your thought that the violence could easily continue might be correct, based simply on economic distress.
The economic factor is critical in the Egyptian revolution from the very beginning. And although the revolution was started actually on the 25th of January, which is the day for police in Egypt, it was allegedly launched because of the violations of the police and the torture and so on, but also another critical factor was the economy, because people were starving, they didn't have economic chances, they didn't have a minimum living standard, and this is why people were frustrated and they were on the streets. And you can trace this later after the 18 days were over, after Mubarak was overthrown. People started reiterating the economic problems, the economic trouble, and then there had been nothing tangible. And this is why actually it's in part why the military is not trusted, because they do not feel like anything changed. Their lives are still the same. And now people are still complaining because they are still poor, they're still suffering, and so on. And now we believe that many of those who are in the streets and in Tahrir Square include large proportions of the poor in Egypt.
So what does that mean, Ahmed Badawi, for the transitional process? What needs to happen, and perhaps also there, where can the West play a role?
The West can only play a very limited role. This is something that Egyptians have to solve on their own. One thing that the West can do is to give better terms of trade, provide incentives for Egyptians to start producing more. All the money that is being spent on democratization stuff, the Egyptians have shown that they don't need this kind of support. They can do it on their own. What is really needed now from the West is to open its doors for Egyptian products, to try to bring tourists back into Egypt, to try to vitalize the economy. In terms of the contribution of the poor to the revolution, this is what we're beginning to see now. The middle class in Egypt, they've had the revolution in January. Now it's the turn of the angry, the hungry, the disenfranchised to go to the street. This is the radical element that you see in many revolutions. Their demands are coming from their stomach, and these demands are so legitimate. Their way of expressing these demands may be questionable, but I think everybody can sympathize with these demands. The problem is, this is not about a decision. Regardless of who's in power, whether it's the army or an elected government, these are structural problems in the Egyptian economy and the Egyptian way of life and the political culture in Egypt. It will take a very long time for these demands to be satisfied. Until there is an awareness that this is going to be a long-term process, you will always find the radical element mobilizing the poor and the angry. Trouble will continue. So I think we are looking for a period of instability in Egypt that would last for a very long time.
Thomas Sazo, that sounds like a very, very rocky process. Again, what can we do from outside to try to support the Egyptians and help keep the process as stable as possible?
It's really difficult. I mean, right now, I think it's very important that those in the Western world, let's say, who have any power or any cooperation with the military, really have to tell them, listen, if you want stability for your country, you have to open up, you have to democratize. Maybe we understand that with your 20 or 30% of national income that goes through military pockets, you don't go away tomorrow. But you must set down a plan of doing this in the future somehow. I mean, let the old generals have their villas and a certain economical influence for the next 10 years or something. But then step by step they have to go away. And that's the main problem. The military and other people from the state who were profiting under the old authoritarian regime, they're afraid of losing their influence, their privileges. They're afraid of going to court, to jail. So there must be some kind of deal between political forces, maybe with the help of the West, and the military and all those interested in the authoritarian regime, to find a way of having a more democratic future without losing too much for those who would lose in a democracy that comes like this.
Ebtisam Hussein, is it your impression that the Council as a whole is cognizant of the urgency that we're talking about? And what's your overall feeling? Are you optimistic?
I'm not. I have to say. The fact is that the speech made by Tantawi and all the other quotes that had been made by the other generals in the council were quite distant from the on-the-ground politics in Egypt.
Thank you very much. Afraid we'll have to leave it there, and we'll be continuing this discussion in future. Thanks to all of you for being with us, and thanks to you out there for tuning in.